So, we were really intrigued by that study you sent over, the one from Mass General Brigham, about sitting and heart health.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for this deep dive, love to get right to the heart of it right now. What's the big news from this research, and what does it actually mean for how we live our lives? What should we be thinking about as we go through our day?
Well, I think what's really interesting is this question that a lot of people have. If I'm hitting the gym, I'm getting my exercise in.
Right.
Does it really matter if I, spend the rest of my day kind of parked on my backside?
Exactly. Does it all just even out?
Yeah.
So let's get really specific here because they talk about sedentary behavior in the study.
Right.
What exactly does that include? Because even when I'm working at my desk, I'm kind of fidgeting or standing up to stretch every once in a while.
This is a really good point. So they define sedentary behavior as any waking activity with very low energy expenditure. So that's, sitting, reclining, lying down.
Mm-hmm.
But importantly, and this is really key, they exclude sleep. So we're really talking about your waking hours and how much of that is spent not moving around.
Got it. So it's not just like watching TV. It's also those long stretches in meetings or hunched over your computer at work.
Exactly.
Okay, so what's the headline here? Like, what did this study actually find out about all that sitting and how it relates to the health of our hearts?
Well, they found that excessive sitting significantly increases your risk of heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically heart failure and cardiovascular death.
So significantly, that's a pretty strong word. Can you give us a sense of like how much does that risk actually go up?
Yeah, so they saw a 40 to 60% greater risk of heart failure and cardiovascular death when people were sedentary for more than, let's say, 10 and a half hours a day.
Wow.
On top of sleep.
And I feel like it's pretty easy to rack up that many hours of sitting time these days.
Oh, absolutely.
Between work and just relaxing at home. This is the part that really jumped out at me, though, that even if you're working out regularly, you might not be totally in the clear. Like, is that kind of the key takeaway for you, too?
You hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
This is the aha moment.
Right.
The study shows that even if you're getting the recommended levels of moderate to vigorous physical activity, which is over 150 minutes a week,
right,
that may not be enough to fully lower your risk if you're spending a lot of time sitting.
So it's not enough to just kind of check the box, like, I work out, so it doesn't matter what else I do.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty surprising. I would think that all that activity would sort of cancel out the sitting time.
Yeah.
So when they were looking at heart problems, what specific conditions were they looking at in terms of this relationship with sitting and exercise?
They looked at 4 main cardiovascular conditions. Atrial fibrillation, which is basically an irregular heartbeat, heart attacks, heart failure, which is when your heart isn't pumping effectively, and then, like we said, death from cardiovascular causes.
And how did they even keep track of people's activity with so much precision, especially with such a big group of people?
So this is where the study design was really interesting. They analyzed data from almost 90,000 people.
Wow.
From the UK Biobank, which is this huge ongoing research project. They used a full week's of data from activity trackers that people wore.
So this is like real data. This isn't just people guessing how much they sat, right?
Exactly. It's not relying on people to self-report. They had actual data from these devices.
So that makes it a lot more reliable.
Exactly. And then they used a machine learning algorithm to classify the sedentary time separate from all the other movements.
So they had a really clear picture.
Really clear picture, yeah.
You mentioned they looked at different types of heart conditions. Right. Did they find that sitting and exercise affected the risk for each of those conditions in the same way?
So it was actually kind of nuanced. They found that for some things like atrial fibrillation and heart attacks,
okay,
getting enough exercise seemed to pretty much eliminate the increased risk from sitting.
Okay, so that's good news, right?
That's good news for those conditions. If you're physically active, you're probably okay. But then there's heart failure and cardiovascular death.
Right, and you were saying that the relationship might be a little different there.
Exactly. For those, getting enough exercise offered some protection, but it didn't totally get rid of the risk that was linked to sitting a lot.
So it wasn't enough to just be active.
And not totally, no.
Interesting. So it really highlights that it's not just about hitting the gym.
Right.
It's about what you're doing all those other hours of the day, too.
Absolutely.
Did the researchers themselves, did they have any strong statements or insights about these findings?
Yeah, they did. Dr. Ezemaka Ufo, who was the lead author on the study, she pointed out that this increased risk from sitting was there even in people who were meeting the physical activity guidelines.
Right.
So it really suggests that it's not just about being active or inactive.
Right.
The amount of time you spend sitting seems to have its own separate effect.
Right. It's its own thing.
It's its own thing.
And what about some of the other senior researchers on the study? What did they have to say?
So Dr. Sean Khurshid really emphasized the dual message that it's good to both reduce your sitting time and increase your activity. He specifically said that avoiding excessive sitting seems especially important for lowering your risk of heart failure and death from cardiovascular causes.
So you really have to do both.
You got to do both.
Make sure you're moving enough, but also not just be stationary for hours at a time.
Exactly.
Even if you hit the gym every day.
Right. And Dr. Patrick Eleanor, he added another interesting point. He said that avoiding too much sitting seems to be a separate and important factor for heart health, apart from exercise.
Okay.
So that kind of gives people another avenue.
Like another tool in the toolbox.
Exactly, yeah. Another tool in the toolbox to improve their heart health beyond just focusing on their workouts.
So it feels like even those small changes could really add up.
Absolutely.
So for anyone who's like, okay, I want to read this whole study myself, where was it published?
It was published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology
Oh, okay.
on November 15th, 2024.
Okay.
And if you're really interested, you can find it online. The DOI, or Digital Object Identifier, is 10.1016JJAC.2024.
Yep.
Got 20.065.
Perfect. So if you want to take your own deep dive.
There you go.
What are the researchers hoping will come from this study, though? Like, what's the big picture impact they're aiming for?
So they're hoping that these findings will be considered when clinical guidelines are developed around physical activity and sedentary behavior. And, they said they're going to keep researching this area. They want to look at how sitting affects other health conditions and study it over longer periods.
It makes sense, right? Because this is an ongoing thing. We're learning more all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, big picture, what's the one thing that our listeners should really take away from this conversation about the Mass General Brigham study?
Well, while getting your exercise is super important for a healthy heart,
Right.
this research says that reducing how much you sit, especially for long periods, also plays a really big role.
So it's not a one or the other.
It's not one or the other, no.
It's both.
It's both.
Yeah.
And this seems especially true when it comes to preventing heart failure and dying from a heart problem.
You can't just say, oh, I worked out today, so now I can just sit on the couch for the rest of the evening.
Right.
You really have to think about how you're moving or not moving all throughout the day.
It's about being more mindful throughout your entire day. Yeah. Not just during that hour at the gym.
Yeah. It's definitely making me think differently about my own habits.
Yeah.
So for you listening, here's a final thought. With all of this new information, what small, realistic changes could you make, even today, to break up those long stretches of sitting? It doesn't have to be a huge overhaul. Just a few simple tweaks could make a real difference for your heart health down the line.
I think that's great advice.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Sounds good.